While I've spoken many times in the Committee of the Whole presenting petitions, questions during question periods, so far this parliamentary session I haven't participated in government orders. So to that end, I'd like to thank the voters in Mission, Matsqui, Abbotsford for giving me an overwhelming majority to represent them in this People's House of Commons in the 45th Parliament. It is the honor of my professional career to be a hometown boy representing his community. Thank you to the people of Mission, Matsqui, Abbotsford. Thank you to my family for supporting me. I don't take this job lightly, and I will work tirelessly on your behalf. Now, on the election. This was a different election. We go back a few months, Prime Minister Trudeau resigned, and Mark Carney was elected. The Prime Minister, my apologies, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister was elected by the Liberal voters to lead the Liberal Party of Canada. In April, the Liberal Party put forward a platform called Canada Strong, Unite, Secure, Protect, Build. The language in this platform is very important. In fact, it led to the Liberals winning the most seats in the House of Commons again. On page 1, it states, America's unjustified and reckless trade war threatens Canadian jobs, businesses, and our way of life. They are trying to weaken us so they can own us. In the face of this threat, we have a plan to build the strongest economy in the G7. That's on page 1 of the Liberal platform. I outlined that point because there was a lot of fear in this election, and rightfully so, about what Canada's relationship would be like with the United States. It came up at the doorstep every day, especially among baby boomers, I will note. The first page of the Liberal platform goes on to state that a government led by the current Prime Minister has a plan to remove barriers to internal trade. It states that we, the Liberals, would reduce internal trade costs by up to 15% and expand our economy by up to $200 billion. That is up to $5,000 for every Canadian. Now, in British Columbia, this was talked a lot about. It was actually a platform commitment to remove internal trade barriers, to have free trade in Canada. It was a platform commitment shared with the Conservative Party of Canada. So that brings us to I believe, the third or fourth sitting week of Parliament since the election, and today we're debating Bill C-5, a Free Trade and Labor Mobility Act. And when we look at this bill, there's a problem, because the rhetoric in the Liberal platform does not match the reality in the legislation before us today. In fact, this bill really does nothing to meet the expectations of what Canadians expected from this Parliament. Let me explain. Bill C-5 does not address any of the key promises made by the Liberal platform. It does not enforce mutual recognition across provinces and territories. It does not address or dismantle provincial trade barriers. It does not include any binding timelines or enforcement mechanisms. It does not establish Buy Canadian procurement standards. It does not fund or prioritize infrastructure needed for free trade between the provinces and territories. It does not protect or support Canadian industries under foreign trade attacks. It does not create the promised centralized one window for major project approvals. And I will note, as a British Columbian, it does not remove the internal trade barriers between provinces and territories for BC farmers, such as our wine growers, to sell their products barrier-free across our great nation. That needs to be pointed out. Secondly, as I mentioned, we have no idea what will be the economic consequences of this bill. The Liberal platform, as I just outlined, said by breaking down internal trade barriers before July 1st, there would be massive economic development in Canada, $5,000 more in the pocket of every Canadian. I'm stating this point again, Madam Speaker, because I don't believe that is the case. And I look forward to the Parliamentary Budget Officer giving a clear breakdown about what the economic positives or negatives of this bill will have on Canada's economy. Another massive and glaring omission in Bill C-5 is its failure to address another key thing Canadians wanted this election, and that was credential recognition for healthcare workers. In my province, we're facing a healthcare crisis. In fact, I receive more calls about hospital closures than almost any other subject in my constituency office. I've had constituents die because the healthcare center in one town was too far away to get to the hospital where they could get the medical treatment that used to be available in their community. There is broad consensus in Canada that we need credential recognition, that we need to allow the foreign-trained nurses and doctors that we permitted into Canada under our immigration point systems to do exactly what they intended to do when they got to Canada. But you're not. The member from Winnipeg North has not. And frankly, in his riding, the Filipinos are very upset with him because he made that promise and he can't deliver on it. Conservatives proposed a Blue Seal program to allow healthcare workers to transfer their skills easily across provinces and to establish a national competency body similar to the Red Seal programs for trade. Bill C-5 does not accomplish any of these issues, even though every politician in this House of Commons knows it was something raised at the doorstep every day during the election. Now, with my limited time here today, I'll just quickly touch upon Part 2 of the bill, the Building Canada Act, which gives the federal government power to designate and fast-track so-called national interest projects. My colleague earlier this morning from Skeena-Bulkley Valley outlined some of the major flaws with this aspect of the bill, and it largely related to the duty to consult. British Columbia has a higher proportion of First Nations than any other province in the country. First Nations in British Columbia want to see major projects built. They want to partner with the federal government, but they see parts of this legislation as a poison pill because the Prime Minister is seeking, it seems to them, to usurp their constitutional given rights to be consulted, to work with the government for economic reconciliation. The bill could have clarified those points, not in the preamble, but in the body of the text, to give First Nations the authority and the respect that they deserve on major projects going forward. That was not included in this bill. Secondly, on major projects, what this bill does is it's going to create a new industry for consultants. Unlike Bill C-69, which has effectively shut down all major resource projects in Canada, this new bill, and I am voting for it, so I'm not completely against it, but I'm outlining the criticisms. This bill will allow proponents to go directly to the Prime Minister's office without checks and balances. Now, in some cases, sure, that's okay, but we don't know what the Prime Minister intends, what his criteria are going to be, and how he's going to be transparent with all of Canada about what projects he's picking and choosing. I don't want to live in a country where one man gets to pick winners and losers. I want a country where every project proponent sees a pathway to a yes or no answer with a reasonable amount of investment dollars put forward. That's not too much to ask. Other countries with our resources already have similar processes. We used to have it in Canada. We're asking for that to be returned. Now, as we're in the period of time to debate this bill only today in the House of Commons because of a closure motion, I'll have to keep my remarks short, but thanks again to the people of Mission Matsqui Abbotsford for putting your trust in me It's a true honor, and I look forward to studying this bill in more detail. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member opposite for voting in favour of the closure motion, because that demonstrates not only does he support the legislation, but he understands and appreciates why it's so important that we pass it before July 1. In his comments, I do have one specific question, because he seems to be of the impression that all Ottawa has to do is pass legislation, even if it goes into provincial jurisdiction, because provinces, from his perspective, might not necessarily mind. I'm not aware if we can actually do that. Specifically, he says the Blue Seal program that Pierre Poilievre talked about was going to recognize any international doctor or nurse, no matter where they live in Canada, that they would in fact be able to do that. Does he believe the federal government has that type of authority? It seems to me it's provincial jurisdiction, and we should be talking with provinces in regards to it.
Member for Mission Mascouy, Abbotsford.
Well, quickly on the question from Winnipeg North, there would have been a federal licensing body. But let's turn to page 2 of the Liberal platform. Unleash free trade in Canada by Canada Day by tabling legislation to eliminate all federal barriers. We're not getting that. Achieve mutual recognition of credentials with provinces and territories so Canadians can achieve and work wherever they want. We're not achieving that. It was right in their platform, page 2. They didn't fulfill that promise, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Repentigny.
The honourable member for Repentigny. Gaspésie, rather. Gaspésie, Île-la-Madeleine, Lustigouche. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to discuss with my colleague about how this, in our opinion, is a step backwards for democracy and for environmental protection. And my colleague must know that by supporting closure and eventually the bill, it's not only going to be on the Liberals' record, but on the Conservatives' record. And with C5, what's going to happen is when there's a big project that's put forward that's considered to be in the national interest, there will be laws that won't need to be followed, including the law on fisheries. Well, at 2.1 in the Fisheries Act, the Fisheries Act is responsible not only for fisheries, but also conserving water for the fish and their habitat. Why does my colleague feel that this bill has to move forward at the expense of our fisheries?
Abbotsford.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. There was multiple questions and points made by the member, and I congratulate him on his entry into the House of Commons. I will note that I am supporting this bill because I do believe that there is an urgency. I just believe that the Prime Minister's office is going too far and is lacking transparency in its approach to the second part of the bill before us today. If the member would like to speak further about fisheries-related issues, I would be pleased to do so as I represent a large portion of the Fraser River and some of the most important salmon stocks in all of Canada.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kamloops Thompson.
Nicola.
Yes.
It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops Thompson, Nicola, Madam Speaker. Before I begin, I want to recognize a new person in Kamloops here, now a new cousin, and his name is Harry Lewis, Harry Smith, born to Lewis Smith and my cousin, Claudia Wright. Welcome to the world, Harry. It's a pleasure to have you as one of our newest members in Kamloops. Madam Speaker, I want to ask my honourable colleague, he spoke about First Nations and consultation. I took over part of his riding through redistribution. We now have 27 First Nations in Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola. I wonder if, given his knowledge of the area, he could expand on his comments that he made respecting First Nations earlier. Thank you.
Member for Mission Fraser Abbotsford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the Fraser Canyon and Fraser Valley region, we're seeing a huge number of First Nations entrepreneurs that want to build projects on their traditional lands. They want to bring economic prosperity to their people, and they are pushing ahead faster than the Government of Canada is able to move with more projects. First Nations want to see barriers eliminated for that work. They want to see federal departments get out of the way with their overburdensome red tape to allow them to build, to take economic risks, but ultimately put forward and support projects that are going to bring economic prosperity to a region of the country that has been ignored by many consecutive governments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.